Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, y'all are here. So I'm going to try to not make this about me because I am a very big Blitz fan. So I'm going to try, so you can check me if I go too far. But first, some housekeeping. You can't have any conversation with any MC without knowing some important information. So first question is, who's your top 10 MCs of all time?
Ooh. All right. Say it again.
Okay, 5. We'll do 5.
Let's start.
No pressure.
I might need all 10, B.
Okay.
'Cause, you know.
Okay.
Rakim for sure. KRS-One, Chuck D. I'll say Public Enemy because it was together.
All right.
I'll say Lauryn Hill. I'll say MC Lyte. I'll say Nas. Sure. I'll say.
3 more.
Got 3 more? Dang. Wait, I think I
got
got 4, man.
All right, come on.
I'll say Reggie Rockstone, because that was very important. And for those of you who don't know him, the Google always works. So he's amazing and a Ghanaian MC who pioneered hip life music, and it's a huge influence on what I do. I'll say Emicida, who's a Brazilian MC.
Nice.
I'll say Ana Tijoux, who's a Colombian phenomenal MC.
Nice.
I got one more.
You got one more?
This one is critical. Who am I missing? There's got to be one. I might hit you guys with the last one later.
Later?
Yeah.
You need a moment?
Because I need a solid moment for that one. That's a sacred one.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, we'll give you that. And then the second question, important question before we get started is, what was the first rhyme you memorized word for word?
Wow. It might be Biggie. Warning.
Morning, you remember?
Now I have to tell you the context of this. So I went to boarding school in Ghana, and boarding school is more like boot camp. I'm from. It's hardcore. And to get out of punishment, I would write rhymes. I would take a cassette tape, press play, rewind. You guys remember? Okay, not all of you may remember this, but for the older ones, you remember the days of tapes and having to rewind and play and trying to write a rhyme off of this. And you were saying this yesterday, was quite an art. I mean, so I had mastered that art. And let's try Biggie. And I'll try to edit it because, Biggie wasn't always... Who the F is this? Paging me at 5:46 in the morning, crack a dawning. Now I'm yawning. Wipe the cold out my eye. See who's this paging me and why. It's my man Pop from the barbershop. Told me he was in the gambling spot. Heard the intricate plot. Niggas wanna stick me like fly paper, neighbor. Slow down, love, please chill, drop the caper. Remember them? It's up the hill, up in Brownsville. Okay. Yeah, that's as far as I could probably go.
That's what's up.
But anyway.
Thank you.
That was warning.
Thank you. You still got it. All right. So I want to start and play a clip of the intro song to your album, Native Son.
Yes.
So for the purpose of the time, it's literally just a clip. But what you hear in this song is Blitz pouring libation, right? So in Ghanaian culture, we pour libations to revere our ancestors, to connect us, the living, with those who came before us by literally sharing drink or sharing food, right? And so you're invoking the names of Yasantua, who led us, you know, against the British colonials, Tete Kwashe, who was big in the cocoa industry, Kwame Nkrumah, who led us to independence. So those are some figures in our Ghanaian ancestry that most of us will call a libation. I want you to give us another type of libation in this moment. If you could invoke the names of artists who've come before you, who have been influential in your own artistry.
Most definitely. I will say probably first and most important for me has been Fela Kuti, whose style and rhythm kind of defined, for me personally, what I've come to understand as impactful and informative. Say James Brown for sure, because it's amazing how his rhythm ended up influencing the continent and then kind of coming back. So James Brown for sure. Jay Dilla, man, that was a moment for all of us, because he also was so connected to an African rhythm that was very rare. So, you know, hip hop is very quantized and on a very sharp 4/4 beat. Everything kind of lands. And, you know, but at home, we have a rhythm that is often almost lagging, you know, like that's the, you know, when we play percussion, there's always this lag that is in it. And Dilla was you know, he was so connected to that lag, and you know, the minute you heard his production, you knew it was Dilla, because it was so African, you know. There's no way I could explain it but that. So Dilla is a huge influence and ancestor in my opinion. Mary Makeba, for sure. Yeah, she was. You know, I've always considered her to be the you know, female counterpart of Fela. You know, it's like if your dad loved Fela, your mom loved Mary Makeba. It was like she was just so honest, pure, and so revolutionary in a way that was and still is rare. For women's voice in popular culture. She broke so many grounds and was the first to do several things, and stood up against the South African government when it was very unsafe and very unpopular to do. So I think those are the core that kind of stay with me.
Okay, cool. So tell us a little bit about your journey. How is it that you have a young boy who's born and raised in Ghana? How do you end up in Brooklyn? And also just in terms, I guess, consciousness or perspective, like how do you go from coming out of a Ghanaian space, hip life, to repping diaspora, you know, and being connected to the black world in a certain way?
Well, I mean, first I have to, you know, it starts at home. You know, I was fortunate and very privileged to grow up. My mom's an educator, elementary school educator. And so from day one, we were very exposed to information and encouraged to read everything around us. My father worked for the Foreign Service in Ghana until that government got overthrown, and then he shifted to work for the United Nations. But our family went through a long kind of strife, because you know, when you belong to a government that's overthrown, it's a very murky thing. And so for a long time, things were very difficult. And then my father decided to, at a very late stage of his life, to become a lawyer. So he just studied for it and passed the bar, and then joined the United Nations, fortunately. And so one of his earliest postings was in Rwanda. He ended up working in Rwanda for 10 years, working the genocide there. But he also worked in Somalia. He worked on the continent extensively. So every time he returned, there was always some discourse about what was going on, and our household was, I mean, we woke up to Nyerere on the wall, and my father's a Nyerere fan, and Nkrumah on the wall, and Mandela on the wall. My father actually was a UN observer. I know today actually marks the late President Mandela's released from prison. My father was a UN observer for the first election in South Africa. So I'm saying this to say that I'm not by accident, I'm not by chance. It's by great fortune and a huge blessing that my parents were who they were and were very connected to solving Africa's problems, and understood that being connected to a larger diaspora made it possible. So that was my earliest. And so things that weren't discussed and learned in school that affected the diaspora, I had access to, like this transatlantic slave trade. It was barely talked about in schools in Ghana, obviously because our education is a complete hand-me-down from the British system. So we never really had the kind of autonomy that you would want to write books or study a curriculum that dealt with how connected you were to the larger diaspora. So anyway, that was kind of my huge fortune. And kind of growing out of that, hip hop culture came at the right point in my life where we had just skipped past a long pseudo dictatorship, and we had just gotten into a democracy. And what was happening was people were beginning to become expressive again, and hip hop culture was like the best tide that swept through at the time, because here you had young, very disenfranchised people in America who had found a voice that was brash, that was direct, that was vulgar sometimes, but always made a point. And if you're a young person growing up anywhere in the world, and I've had the fortune of traveling enough to meet young people, and when we discuss when we first got into hip hop, it's almost always the same thing. It's like it was this moment that we all felt like, wait a second, well, we can say something and people will listen. And the beauty of hip hop too is that it was sample culture. So it made it possible for you to just take whatever was around you. You didn't need extensive studying of music, scales and knowledge of music to if you felt it and you knew how to work the rhythm, you could create something amazing. And so that was the journey for me. And then kind of coming out of that, I knew at the time the internet wasn't what it is now. There wasn't social media on that level. And so I knew that if I stayed in Ghana, my voice may have been limited. And because I was so obsessed with this connection of diaspora, I was like, I had to get out. And I also know that America has a media monopoly on the world. And so if you step on this platform, your chances of reaching a wider diaspora is increased tenfold. Yeah. And so I knew it was going to be cold as hell here. And this was probably not the first choice. If there was a warmer place to go to that had that same media monopoly, I'd have gone there. But, I came here because I knew that if I stood on this platform, then I'll be able to scream and it will ricochet all over the world, and it has.
Yeah. So what's Blitz the Ambassador mean? Like, in terms of your name, is that an avatar of some sort? Like, what is it? Well,
I'll be honest, the Blitz part don't mean a whole lot. It was more like the style that I had when I started rapping. I was obsessed with like speed rap and the twisted type and the even like the Daz Effect style, rickety rap, that style. And so, folks used to be like, hey man, style's so blitz, are you blitzing it? And I was like, not bad. That might work. And then the ambassador part kind of came later, when I got very clear about what I wanted to achieve, these bridges that I wanted to build, and this idea that, hip hop culture and music in general could foster a lot of understanding amongst people who lack understanding.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I want to connect the idea of you being an ambassador, right, in this diaspora consciousness. Your last album is named Afropolitan Dreams, right? And so Afropolitan is a term that has become rather popular here lately. And I want to read a quote from Taye Selassie, who's the author of Ghana Must Go. And she defines Afropolitan, she says, they, read we, are Afropolitans. There's at least one place on the African continent to which we tie our sense of self, be it a nation state, a city, or an auntie's kitchen. Then there's a G8 city or two or three that we know like the back of our hands, and the various institutions that know us for our famed focus. We are Afropolitans, not citizens, but Africans of the world. connect that thought of being Afropolitan to your diaspora consciousness? Are those things in line with one another? Are they the same? Are they mutually exhaustive? What do you think?
I think that like any new term, there's always like a wrestle for the soul of it, you know.
Yeah.
And when I was making this album, I knew that what I wanted to achieve was to tell a story of the story that I knew, which was leaving home and picking up all this great experience and meeting brilliant people and learning from them and returning home to affect the kind of change that I think I can based on the experience I've gotten globally. So that was kind of how I defined it for myself. Everybody's got that term, and I've heard all types of debates, some for and some against, and some say, like none of that is of consequence. I think that if my choice to use it and my choice to connect to it was an opportunity that I saw, because I also saw that it was being manipulated in a very commercial sense, in that, let me sell you this bag, but here's some African fabric on it. There's some Ankara on it. So now it's Afropolitan. And it also pushed a very elitist agenda, which, personally I'm not a fan of. And so I got very clear, and I decided, well, I have to approach it from a proletarian stance, and I have to know that I can just the same way people are going for the soul of it, I can throw my hat in the ring and say, here's a very important word, because it is important. It is important because we're living, we're globalized Africans now. Even if you've never left the continent of Africa, you already are connected on levels that you will not even believe, which was not the case back in the day. I mean, it's gradually gotten that way. I mean, we were talking about back when somebody will come from America and will show up with a cassette tape or a video, and everybody be like, and you'll be like, man, it's been out for like 2 years, and we'll be like, oh my God, it's brand new to us, but now you show up with stuff and they're like, that's old.
You're old.
Man,
they're putting you on.
Oh, they're putting you way on. Listen, when I go back to Ghana, my brother lives there, and he plays me stuff, and I'm like, how do you even hear this? Like how, but it's changed so much. So we're globalized Africans, and I think that the goal is not to be lost in, an agenda that's been created to exploit. The goal is, how do you take this global narrative and discourse and kind of take what you need from it to repair where you're from, because we have a lot of repairing to do on the continent. So none of this debate means anything to me if we're not focused on building some institutions on the continent that can solve our problems. And I feel that, yes, an institution like Duke, there is information here, and information doesn't discriminate as far as where you're from and what you look like. It's information, and if you can get a hold of it and you can craft it to fit what you need, then you've got it. And I think that that's where it's happening. It's a lot of people have traveled and have absorbed a lot of things, and it's also how you return home, because we also have this returnee culture where, of course, you're used to your lights coming on all the time and your water running when you turn it on, you know what I'm saying? And you touch down in a cry and you're all types of pissed because there's doomsaw and the lights is off and on and water doesn't run when it has to. And then the worst part is also you're feeling that you know it all. Which is something that I've constantly had to check myself on every level. Every time I'm home, when I'm dealing with any conversations, I have to first fall back and say, well, if you live here, then you know better than me, period. Whether you have the tools to solve them, none of that matters. You know more than I do. And it's the humble return that I seldom see when I see a lot of returnees, because they want to transplant their lives that they have here and the privilege that they have here, and they just kind of duplicate it at home. So I mean, these are all things that kind of, I know it's like a loaded answer, but it kind of deals with how I felt Afropolitanism kind of could be curated in a way that deals with our issues and how we can solve them.
So you said a couple things that have me thinking in this moment. I'm wondering, because I study you, and I noticed that every time you step out into the world, you're wearing something African, whether it's a hat, a jacket, your pants, whatever, right? And I tend to operate in the same way for my own reasons. I want to hear your reasons.
Because it's fly.
Of course. Of course. But is there politics?
I mean, there's always politics.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's, there is identity, and I think identity is critical also in dealing with this Afropolitan term.
Yeah.
Identity is critical, and especially for people who have been consistently robbed of the opportunity to define themselves. You are constantly looking for ways and things to claim as your own. And style is everything, in my opinion. You have to step out with that confidence, and it kind of, from there on, it kind of seeps into everything else you do. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it is completely political how I choose to dress, how I choose to carry myself, how I choose to speak. It's constantly in the back of my mind that I'm representing, and it's important.
You have any thoughts on cultural appropriation in that regard? Because when we talk about Afropolitanism, identity, you mentioned that idea. I see this all the time, right? So I remember a time going to Ghana when I was younger and being hyped because I knew that my money would stretch far and I could get all kinds of fly gear and come back home and be good for the year, right? And then now I'm starting to see a lot of Ankara and wax print stuff online. People making trash cans and throw pillows and you throw African fabric on it, it's hot. And so there was this, there's a designer boxing kitting, really hot. Once she designed for Beyonce, it was a wrap, right? So she's selling shorts for like $350 Ankara that I know I can get for $5 at home, right? So I guess I'm interested in your thoughts about that kind of trajectory in terms of like the capitalist approach to our culture, and is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it necessarily all or, you know what I mean?
That's a very, very difficult question. I mean, on one end, you can't once you release something into the world, you can't police it, and unfortunately, the tenets of capitalism are, they are the most intrusive, because they don't, it's whoever's got the money, gets to make the decisions. And so it's a very difficult thing to combat. Every suit that I get made in Ghana. Okay. I don't get anything made outside. These hats, I wear everything that's African. It's made on the continent. And the reason is because I understand supporting the local economy, and I understand what that means for craftsmen to see their work on a world stage. Say if I'm playing at Roskilde in front of 20,000 people, that man who made that suit can get that photo and say, listen, because Blitz the Ambassador wore that at Roskilde, I can make more, and it supports a grassroots kind of business. That's what I care about. It's very difficult. I can't police how other people, whether they're from the culture or whether they're not from the culture, how they choose to represent it. I can only represent it the way I am, and hopefully other people see that as an example and say, well, that's a better way in which to engage with a culture, because the culture vulturing is real. And it's not just in the gear, it's in the sound that it's taking, it's in the, and we talked a little briefly about cultural appropriation yesterday. It had me thinking last night, when you take from a culture, right? And we're all borrowing from cultures. It's a human thing. Like nobody is here that isn't influenced by something that's outside their culture, or that doesn't take on something that's outside their culture. I guess the big difference is how you engage with that thing. If you're engaging with it from an exploitative, perspective, and not giving back, and not honoring where you're getting this from. Now that, I feel, is the core difference between those who can be in a culture and can be off a culture and can appreciate a culture and know that whatever is coming back, especially on a financial end, because we live in a world where the finances dictate a lot. So if you go and you make music, and you take say Caribbean music, and you're not Caribbean, and you make a lot of money off of it, right? To just take that and go into your community and spend it in your community, and not figure out ways to get that back in, or whether to lift other artists back into whatever world you're in, or to support businesses, or to you know, to have philanthropic engagements with the community that you take from. I think that's when that's what I can't get with. I can't get with people who come into your community, take, and not give. You know, and so I also have to check myself consistently, because I'm constantly, you know, as a creative, you're always digging from cultures. And when I went to Brazil to shoot the running, that was a very thing I was very clear about. That one, I engaged with the community from a place of respect and a place of solidarity, and making sure that even now that I'm done, what I'm working on now is returning to Bahia to screen for free this video for the community that helped me work on it. And those things are the ways that show that you respect the community that you're engaging with. And then I think it moves away from exploiting and it goes to sharing.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that, because in addition to being an MC, you're a budding filmmaker. Is that a fair assessment?
Budding, dang.
I mean, come on. It's a good thing.
I mean, yeah.
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 I mean, do you see yourself as a filmmaker?
I do. I do, and I would love to make more films.
Yeah.
Unlike, you know, music, filmmaking is a very cash in just, you know, intense process, and you can't do anything without having it all on day one. I mean, music, I mean, you can call a trumpeter in today, and when you get your little check in 6 months, you can call a bass player in. You know, filmmaking is different. I mean, everybody lines up on the same day with their hands out, and you're like, damn, you know, okay, I may have to, you know, how do you do this, you know? So, but it is a format that I absolutely admire, and I think it is probably the most moving images are probably the most influential and the most important, especially again, and I constantly keep talking from a perspective of disenfranchised people who haven't had the opportunity to define themselves in terms of images, right? So I remember going to the theater to see, forget what it was, perhaps, I think it was Beasts of No Nation, which I remember prior to, there were several previews for a number of films, none of which was about people of color. But then I realized that in sitting through about 10 previews of film, I had an opportunity to process a multi-layer of white existence, right? So let me explain. So it was like, here is a story of a broken family that's trying to get it together. It's beautiful. Here's a story of a businessman who's losing it all but wants to keep his family. It's beautiful. Here's a story of an athlete who, you know, I mean, and here's a story of a war film that, you know, that, so within those few previews, I started thinking myself, well, after all of this, I'm about to watch the most barbaric and most ridiculous violence perpetuated on screen.
Was this in Ghana?
This was in Ghana, right? This was in Ghana. It was at the premiere, right, of the film. And I thought to myself immediately, this is why when, say, a catastrophe happens globally, right, to, say, in Paris, which was a disaster, right, the terrorism that happened there, immediately the world processes it differently, because immediately you're thinking to yourself, I've engaged on several levels of white existence, so I can see these people as human, and more importantly, I can see them as the man who is losing his house and trying to get it together. That's who got shot. Oh, the woman who, you know, so those are humanizing stories, you understand? Now when something happens in Nigeria, right, as barbaric and as violent, and probably more violent, the difference in how we process it is because we cannot humanize them. You look at them through the lens that you've constantly been presented with, which is war, which is Hotel Rwanda, which is Beasts of No Nation, which are all these things. And so there is no human connection to such a very, very vile and very inhumane treatment of people on this planet. And so I started to think clearly about that and realize that the difference is cinema. And the difference is how we constantly portray a people. Because we all consume cinema on every level, consistently. We've watched thousands of films, thousands. And if you ask yourself how many films truly dealt with a multi-layer of existence of people of color, you would find very few. If I ask this room, name 5 directors from, even let's start with African American. We'll get Spike Lee, and we may get Ava DuVernay because she's hot and new, but we can't name more than that, right? Now let's go external. Let's say the diaspora. Let's say Brazil. Let's name 5 directors. Let's name 5 in Africa. But you've watched 1,000+ movies, and you're probably going to be watching thousands more. Now, this is why I looked at cinema and said to myself, well, I love making music, and I would make music forever. But in terms of critically analyzing your people and looking at how little representation we have and how few of our stories are told, I think it's a crime and it's a travesty. Now, more importantly, I also realized that social media has become a replacement for that, because we're so thirsty for images that that are coming from the diaspora. So images from Brazil, images from people are beginning to curate them themselves without these sanctions and without having to go through these green light processes, who are absolutely not interested in telling your story because it doesn't interest them. So I think that those are things that is my main reason for getting into film.
Okay, so I want to watch some clips of your art, and maybe you can tell us a little bit of
All right. In the way.
What you were thinking, what you trying to accomplish.
Just
So we're watching Diasporatical Trilogy. The first in that series is a song called Juju Girl. So I'm cut a little short, so we can talk a little bit.
Keep moving. Yes, yes. Oh,
No,
thank
but
you.
I wanted to, instead of maybe playing them all straight through, maybe talk a little bit in between.
Okay.
So I was telling Blitz last night in conversation, I remember when this song came out, and I've officially claimed it as my theme song. But for those who don't know, explain, what is a Juju Girl?
Whoa. So juju in in the context of at least Ghanaian culture is magic. But like you mentioned yesterday, it's also very derogatory sometimes. It's also kind of associated with witchcraft in a negative way. And I remember when I was writing the song, I was very nervous because for those of you who don't know, Ghana is Christian. I mean, it's like
Extra Christian.
I mean, it's like the Jesus is real there. Realer than anywhere else that I've been, and so most of my family is Christian. So, when you're writing music like this, you're always asking yourself, what is going to be the response? I mean, this is the chorus of the song, so it's a refrain. People are going to be singing it over and over again. So I remember I was like, is that what I really want to do? Because people might just catch me and want to pray for me instantly when they see me. But I went ahead with it, and I knew that if I was going to do this, and one thing that has troubled me, and I guess it's a deeper thing, is how much African spirituality is just has a negative connotation consistently. I mean, across the board, there's no view of it that has merit, and it's very ironic too, because I say, but your name is Kweku or Abena or like for me, Bazawule. It's like it has African traditional, spiritual, everything in it. So it's like we live a very schizophrenic life back home, where it's like on one end, you have it and you have it, but on the other hand, because of colonization and because of a lot of brainwash, and again, I'm not saying this at all in saying that Christian beliefs are not. I mean, it's a way that we practice it in a way that one is completely validated and the other one is invalid. That I think is very, very problematic, because again, this is your identity. And so when I wrote Juju Girl, I was very clear that it would be controversial. And so one thing I was very clear about, and I learned this from like the Bob Marleys and the Felads and them, and Miriam Makeba specifically too, is that if you're going to make a song with like some strong messaging, you got to make it as sweet and beautiful, and it's got to be gorgeous. And so I spent more time than I've spent writing any song on this song, just making sure that the parts moved and it looked beautiful. And when we shot the video, I was very clear on the beauty that I wanted to capture. And so when I went home to premiere it, I was nervous, but when it came out, I mean, the number of people that came up to me saying how much they loved it, and I mean, these were like hardcore Christians, how much it touched them, and I realized that it's really because we've never seen this beautifully, and that's the difference.
Yeah, give thanks. Okay, so we're gonna move from Accra to Brooklyn with Shine. Okay, don't be mad at me, but we're running out of time. You guys can definitely watch this online. But I want to make sure we get to the other one too. Yeah. So just really quickly, if you can tell us what we're seeing.
Oh yeah, Shine was the second one we shot in the trilogy series, and very, very similar to Juju Girl. I knew that, again, when people think about what a guardian angel is, most people of African descent may never picture, a raffia-clad spirit, because where are you going to see that, But think about it, like that's your ancestry, and so it's only right. And so the juxtaposition for me is everything. So it's like picking Zinga, who was my lead, and just an amazing spirit. The young girl was amazing to work with, and but making sure that she was represented so beautifully, and the spirit. It was beautiful, so it works, So people who would have been probably adverse to something like this are immediately tied to the story and are rooting for her. Yeah. And I think that's kind of it was also one piece that I was very clear about, attacking patriarchy on some level, because that's something that I'm very clear about as something that is a huge hindrance to any kind of internal evolution and revolution that's happening within our communities, is that we're constantly forgetting that patriarchy is just as destructive as racism and anything else. And so that was another opportunity for me to, kind of vest this power in this little girl and kind of render her father helpless. And kind of coming to his aid was something critical. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're gonna go from Brooklyn to Bahia with Running. Okay, don't be mad at me.
Thank you.
So with Running, what are we saying?
Oh man, well this was one of the most interesting ones to make. One's because I was first of all working outside of my comfort zone. Brooklyn, I know Brooklyn. I lived there. I knew how to shoot in a train station without permits. Accra. I know Accra. I grew up there. Bahia was different. I didn't speak the language, and I met. I knew only one person when I was going there, someone whom I met on Instagram, and I think it's important to mention that, because we're talking about how our diaspora is connected through visuals. So this young lady had a tutorial on how to tie a gele. I found that on Instagram, and I immediately assumed that she was African. And I loved it. It was like in different compartments, and it showed you each step on how to tie it. And I was like, oh, this would be dope to post. So I posted it, and it's like getting tons of likes. But I noticed that most of the comments were in Portuguese. So of course I'm like copying them and putting them in Google Translate. Like, what are you saying? You know? And then finally, the young lady who did it, her name is Thais. She was tagged in the photo, and writes me immediately like, oh my God, we love your music here in Bahia, and if you ever want to do anything, like let us know. We'll be happy to help you out. And immediately I was like, Bahia, cool. So I wrote her, and I was like, let's do this. And I landed there, and I didn't know anybody. I ended up with close to 40 people in this production. And I was there for 10 days, and for 5 days I didn't have a story because, again, it was a space I was very unfamiliar with. So I showed up and just hoping that something would hit me. And when I started going through the favelas, I realized what was happening was that they were tearing down a lot of the buildings. And I was curious about it, and they were telling me that they're building these high-rises that changes the topography. And so then the government comes and then clears out another group of people, builds another high-rise, and that's just what they've been doing. So like this whole area had been getting gentrified for the last 5 years on a rapid rate. And immediately I was like, wow, this is the story, and the community was so helpful in getting it done, cooking for the production and helping us out with everything we needed. I mean, nobody barely got paid for that, because they just understood what we were trying to do. And so that was magical. I mean, there's so many magical things that I can't go into for lack of time for this video. But again, it tied it all together in trying to present our spirituality as a very important part of who we are. And I really doubt that as a people we will stand a chance if your spiritual core is completely adverse to who you are. I think that's we have to find some kind of balance between embracing religion and embracing our spirituality as well. And so those are things that were very core in trying to achieve this.
Yeah.
This.
Well, I have 15 more questions, so we only have 15 more minutes. So I'm going to open it up for question and answer.
Cool.
But which one's your favorite?
Oh boy, that's hard.
I'll tell you mine.
Tell me yours.
Shine is my favorite.
Shine,
Yeah.
shine. Anybody here like Shine?
Yeah, Shine.
Oh
right?
boy, Shine winning, huh?
Shine winning.
Okay, all
What
right.
about you?
I like them all for different reasons. I think that running was the first, like in terms of aesthetic beauty, it was the moment that I actually had a moment to be clear visually what I wanted to convey, and I was able to get it. I think Shine was the most emotionally connected. The story was emotional, and that's the beautiful thing about shooting with kids. Like you've already won. If you cast the right child who can bring that out, and Zenga again was brilliant, and so was Jamie, who did the choreography, was amazing, and then Juju girl I just love for all that it is.
Make sure you follow Blitz, particularly on Instagram, because he's curated a visually beautiful page. He's at Blitz the Ambassador, right?
Blitz Ambassador.
Blitz Ambassador. Questions? You guys have questions, comments? Because I have 15 more. Yes.
You're here to give us the story in the background. For someone would see it without you, how would they understand what you're conveying without being offensive?
Of course, yeah, I understand the question. Well, the beautiful thing about magical realism as my medium is that it's open-ended, and I don't like to give clear, defined narratives, because I don't think that's how life works. I feel like you bring your understanding to the visual, and you make up your mind what is happening. And I've had all types of interpretations of my work, stuff that I had absolutely never even thought about. And I think that is important. That's what art is supposed to do. I think if you walk into a gallery and you see somebody just throw some paint on a piece of canvas, it's for you to get what he's trying to achieve. And I think that's what I love about filmmaking in the way that I'm approaching it, is that I'm trying to, of course, I have what I'm trying to convey, but I think that essentially I want people, based on who they are, their backgrounds, their experiences, to bring that to watching the films.
Can I make one comment?
Please, please.
Was the dad being deported, but she's being free? She was free. She was allowed to experience the freedom.
That's true too, right? I can't say yes or no. I mean, I can't say yes or no. Any questions, please? Yes.
It's kind of a surfacey question, but this will resolve a debate in my head. When's your birthday?
Oh, April 19th. He already threw me under the bus. April 19th. Yes.
Okay, I missed that part. The other question is, as it relates to imagery and imagery as activism.
Yes.
Because that's one of the things that I've noticed in your videos and I mean, just the photographs that you posted on Instagram. How has activism informed the imagery that you create?
Great. I mean, I think it's, I've never been able to separate the two, you know? I mean, I really got into art because I really wanted to say something. And I remember even back when because I started by just drawing, that was it. I drew and painted for a long time. And I think that, you know, it's very interesting when you're drawing, it's almost like a solo sport. It's just you and the canvas and you do what you do. And then, you know, when you start making music, it's like your family has to grow a little bit more. I mean, now you need an engineer at least, right, to convey it. And now I have a 6-piece band, and you need to come see us tonight. Plug. You know, but then filmmaking, it's like almost like a larger family. So I feel like, you know, now you start to engage with ideology, and then you know, with my DP, for instance, we have these conversations, these real deep existential conversations, some of which are like way over the top, but those are kind of what end up informing. So my entire circle is already of people who are trying to change the world in some way, and I'm just, you know, fortunate that I can, you know, do it in a visual manner, and people can see. So I've never looked at my activism as a separate thing from my art. I feel like they're one and the same. One helps me achieve the other. That's it.
You have a feature film coming?
I do have a feature film coming. Yeah, yeah. I mean, will you guys watch a feature film? I mean,
Of course.
okay. You know, well then, you know, when I start crowdfunding, I'll come find you because you said, you know, and I'm seeing everybody's face. So, but yeah, making a feature film is the next thing for me, and I really appreciated making this trilogy because it was like filmmaking boot camp. I literally made each one within 3 months of each other, and each time I had to write immediately, I had to produce immediately, I had to cast immediately, I had to edit immediately, and I had to release it immediately. And that was like doing it in 3 different spaces, in 3 different time zones, while thinking about the next and thinking about how they were all gonna connect and how that white dress was gonna like link. And it was like all this like but it was very good for me because it was very, it was work, you know, and I feel much more prepared now to make a full feature. And I've written one. Actually, I've been writing it for 8 years. It's hard work. And it's not as easy as rhyming, and I'm realizing that is its own art. But it's a boxing movie, and there's a community in Ghana called Bukom that is amazing. And as much as boxing is such a global sport, it seems, you know, every boxing movie that comes out is literally, you know, American, you know, from, you know, Rocky to Southpaw to Raging Bull, all these great movies. And I've always wondered why this community, and this community has produced over 10 world champions. Everybody from Joshua Claude to Ike Quarte to Azuma Nelson. We always had amazing fighters come out of this community. So yeah, I'm making a boxing film, and I'm super excited, but it has all the magic, so.
It's coming.
Yeah. Please.
Yeah, as I hear you mention magical realism.
Yes, sir.
And are you familiar with the authors from Haiti and Colombia?
Yes, I'm familiar. I'm familiar with Colombia. I'm familiar with Gael Marquez, Garcia Marquez.
And from Haiti, we need the best.
I do not know, so I need.
Stephen Alexis.
Okay, so I need to.
Donald Tuyo,
I need a list from you.
and two filmmakers. Raoul Peck
I know Raoul Peck very well.
and Arnold Antonet.
I do not know him.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So that's and please, if anybody has a list for me, I will take it. But that's where I first, reading Garcia Marquez was my first foray into kind of this imaginative world, and I think it's amazing. Like, and also for our culture, you almost can't make work without that being an element of it, because we're so connected to that element. So thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
Please.
Asia.
What did you learn about diaspora that you didn't already know in making this trilogy, particularly being outside of your comfort zone in Bahia?
Wow. I mean, well, first I'll say that, man, the similarities are staggering. I mean, I've always kind of felt, okay, we're connected on different hemispheres, and all right. But like, I mean, to be eating akaraje in Bahia and like know that like we have with shit. Oh, I mean, it was like unbelievable. So like from a food and music perspective, but I also found out that our shortcomings are very similar as well. But the beautiful thing I found was that when a people have been dispersed via the same kind of vehicle of dispersion, we kind of it's like a virus that attacks a body and kind of or attacks a group of people. Some people become immune to certain parts of it, right? And other based on where you are, right? So you find that some people are the way they found a way to deal with certain things that white supremacist dispersion kind of has it's made them immune to certain elements. And so I was constantly thinking, well, what if we had and then I started thinking, to your question, how important it was in the late 50s, late 40s and early 50s when these conferences were happening in Europe and sometimes the Caribbean with the Du Boises and the Kwame Nkrumahs and these Pan-African conferences. I think they were the first to understand that if you're immune to something, then you've got an upper hand there, but you may not be immune to another element of it, right? And so I can take what you've learned, and so for instance, in America, what had happened was there was a great deal of intellectualism that had happened post Reconstruction. So there was tons of just brain power that wasn't getting serviced because black people in this country didn't have that opportunity to use it, right? And so, say a Kwame Nkrumah knew that, wait a second, we got all this gold and we got all this cocoa money, and so I can bring, but we don't have any universities because the universities that we had were British and they just left, right? And so that was the real practical kind of use of what I was visualizing when I was traveling, especially in Brazil, to watch how focused they were on curation. I was amazed at you could go anywhere and find just a beautiful small curation of ceramics in Bahia, or slave revolts in Bahia. It was all in these places, but Bahia is 90% black, and they've never had a black mayor, right? So that's a shortcoming, which, but then you see in America, what I mean? Like, certain gains have been made in it, and then you look on the continent, you look at the shortcomings there, and you say, but wait a second, if we just found ways to just connect and say, okay, how can we, and I will say that because of the lack of representation in Bahia, that's why all that gentrification was happening, because the mayor is the son of a mayor before, and he was decent, so they thought that his son would be good as well, and he came in and he's got Vegas on his mind, so he's just tearing down communities, so it's representation is everything. And so to be there and to watch how and that's so the conversations we were having there was like, so you know, have you figured this part out? You know, and I'm going, well, have you figured this part out? You know, have you figured out how to tell stories about yourself? Who funds them? How do you fund them? Like, I want to know how I can get money to make my film. Like, how are you getting money to make your films? So it's like, but these are things that, again, as a diaspora, it's critical that we engage with one another and find that. And of course, allies are important, and of course, people who mean well are important. But as a core, the diaspora's responsibility to find ways to connect to each other that make us self-sufficient. You know what I mean? And not dependent. Yeah. So that was what I learned.
So we are out of time. I am
Oh,
sorry.
I can't take one.
Blitz has to go to.
For your list.
Oh, give
Please.
Umar bin Hussein,
Umar bin Hussein.
The Last Poets.
Oh yes, okay. Yes.
Yes, so if you don't have a ticket to Blitz show, you need to get one like right now.
Like right now, right now.
Blitz gives an amazing show. You don't want to miss it tonight at 8 o'clock at Motorco.
Thank
We're
you.
very thankful.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you. We just gonna let it ride? Oh, did I break it? Nope.
Thank you.
All right.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.